Time to tackle the leaking lift cylinder on the new wheel loader. This was known when it was purchased, so no surprise. We tried it first with just a big pipe branch, tiny bit of heat, and see if things would start to come apart. A long pipe and a little bit of hammering, and nothing moved. So next on was cutting out a tool in a thick steel sheet, welding on some tabs to be able to clamp it in place, because we had realized there was gonna be quite a bit of force used to get this apart. And with it clamped in place, big sledgehammer did not move it, not easily at least. So back on with more heat, a lot more than at the first test. We still try to keep it below burning off all the paint. No movement, more heat. Paint might have suffered a tiny bit in areas. And eventually, once it was hot enough and we had hammered enough times on it, it did start to move, so that's good. Then we ran into issues that we had to start moving the tool around to get a new grip and unbolt things further. And for quite a few turns in the beginning, it did require hammering. After a while, we could start getting it to move with the pipe branch, but all of a sudden it was like it was jammed in place again, and we required more heat and things started moving easier again. So looks like we will manage this also. Well, it's back together already, but at the time of posting this video. Some ratchet strap was used to secure the cylinder, so because next up was starting to look at removing the pin. We did ensure that we have it far enough out that it would come undone without trouble. Then we called it a day. It was late in the evening, so next day we continued some cleanup before unbolting more things. And here the thread was a bit damaged, so it was quite a bit of struggling to get the nut off it. We ended up cutting off some of the damaged section. The pin came out without too much trouble. There were some shims, some washer stairs we had to take care of. Then we removed the hydraulic hoses feeding the cylinder. It could be lowered down and could be pulled apart, and with it apart we could carry it into the garage to look at fitting fresh seals into it. And they have a lock pin under one of the bushings here. Sprayed it with some compressed air and it kind of came out a little but stopped, and it's threaded internally. I think it's an M4, so a tiny bolt can be threaded in and it can be easily pulled out, so that was nice. Made a mark for when assembling, seeing that it is in the correct location, even if the pin needs, or the hole needs to line up also. Pipe for leverage at the other end of the piston. Had some trouble fitting the tool we had made, because it's the same size at the other end, but I used the threaded rod to kind of expand it a tiny bit, but it came out undone super easily, so it wasn't bolted on there hard at all, but the lock pin holds it in place, so it doesn't really matter. Still needed a pipe wrench for the first like half turn, and then it could be unbolted by hand the rest of the way.
Ja.
And the lid part of the hydraulic cylinder could be pulled out. The dust seal here is just a rubber one. I kind of prefer the one with a steel outer part. Feels more sturdy, but these are easier to replace. So had struggled quite a bit to remove the old seal from the inside. Had to eventually I was able to start getting some screwdrivers in there. I just jabbed pokey sharp tools into it and tried to pry it out. Eventually got a big enough screwdriver in there that it could be forced out, and it's kind of lost all of its color here. I'm not sure if that's I think it should have been blue. The new one was blue at least. If it's a good reason for that, heat, age, wrong hydraulic oil. Anyone have any suggestion why the seal would have lost its color? Please comment.
Neråt så att det kryper in fukt.
Did try to clean up. That's partly why it was so hard to get it undone. There is a bit of rust and corrosion in the threads. Maybe some water's made its way into the threads over time. Putting a screwdriver under the main sealing part and then pulling on it, that kind of forced up the inner support rubber for the seal. Here I needed an extra hand, but my dad was around and it kind of poked up, so a small screwdriver could be fitted under there and secure it. Then I just cut these off because they'll be getting replaced anyway. With them out of the way, most of the parts, the seals on the piston had been removed. They use there is no slide bushing in there. It's a metal one with grooves in it for hydraulic oil. Here I'm using a trick I learned in another YouTube video somewhere, that you take a zip tie and use that as kind of a handle and eases, make sure everything is well oiled. And here the seal is kind of purple, even if I'm not legally colorblind, but I don't pay much attention to colors. What I removed was more of a blue color, so but I'm sure that will work. Did bring out the brass brush to clean up the threads also on the lid for installing seals, and a rag will jam it very quickly. Boiled some water or heated up some water to soften the seal that goes into the lid part here, and I can't find, I made kind of a rudimentary tool that does this flipping over, but I couldn't find it, and I struggled with the lock ring pliers and a screwdriver as I've done before, and eventually got it after it slipped a couple of times because I want it oiled also. These tools have no sharp edges where I'm putting force on them, so it should work fine. And it's kind of a hefty seal in this one. It feels like it's thick compared to some of the other hydraulic cylinders I've worked with. But got it into its groove, and then it's the part you have kind of folded in on itself. You need to be able to kind of push that back out, and it took quite a bit of force getting it to snap into its groove. And with that into place, I had a little bit of grease in the groove where the dust seal is supposed to sit. There was a bit of corrosion there. I had cleaned out in that groove. Some moisture water have collected in there over time, but I don't see any issues that it shouldn't work. That was also a little trick to get it to seat fully in the groove, and then an O-ring on the outside. With that, all the new parts were in place. The lid, I put the piston upright and could put a little bit of force on it getting. There was no sharp edge, it was kind of a bevel there that I couldn't see an issue. I'm sure you're supposed to, if you want to do it properly, have this kind of a protective sleeve over the area there, but this has worked in the past, so threaded the piston head on there. Did require the pipe branch the last little bit to get the holes to line up, and then I just pushed that lock pin in place and removed the bolt used for extracting it, and the bushings could go back on there. Everything was well oiled with
Ja,
fresh
jag tror det är
hydraulic
klart.
oil. Then some cleanup, and it's mainly the lower half that's where moisture has been sitting, I guess, over time. I had stuffed a rag in there to not have any debris into the cylinder. And I took the wire brush to it. Also found that this pipe connection up here had kind of a sharp ridge on it, kind of a burr. So went in there with a knife and tried to remove that and get a smooth edge. And once I was satisfied with that, the piston was brought back outside, and I held it in place, and my dad gave it a few taps and it slid right in there.
Ja, vi är förbi.
It was very quickly got hard to twist it,
Ja,
but my dad helped out twisting
jag
the
frågade
entire
honom att köra
piston rod, and we could get it a little bit in by hand. I added plenty of just medium strength Loctite on here.
Nej, vi
It
får ta
should
till.
help keep corrosion out of the threads at least. Realized we would have to start using tools to get it in. We cut a slot in just a sheet of plywood, and that actually was strong enough to work as a tool to get it most of the way in before we had to start using the big pipe wrench and the custom tool. At the end we tightened it up to a snug fit with the pipe wrench. Needed a few little more tapping to get far enough in there to line up with the mounting point on the lifting arms. Was lifted up and secured with the luggage strap, ratchet strap. Some grease was added to the shims to help them stay in place as they were positioned. And then the pin could be inserted. Needed to adjust the hole for the lock pin on it, or lock bolt, before driving it all the way in. With that in place, the hydraulic hoses could be refitted. It's kind of a tight fit down there, but could at least use a normal wrench to tighten it most of the way up, and then the last little bit I used one of those crow's feet extensions to snug it up the last.
Ja, sådär.
Lock pin or lock bolt, we had shortened that and removed a little bit of the damaged threads. It has one of those squeezed nuts that's a little oval, so it's kind of a lock nut, and then plenty of Loctite, so shouldn't be any issues. The central lubing hose was reattached. It had kind of a little clamp holding it in place. Had probably gotten some dirt in there, so needed to clean out the hole and threads before I could get the threads to grab. Tool was installed, was given a few extra tabs here to tighten it up.
Där når vi tror jag vi är nice.
Things were removed, did give it a little bit of paint. I just folded the paper around to not get paint on the
Ska jag
chrome.
dra bort?
It might get a little more love with a little more paint in some other areas also, but that will have to wait until the summer. It was started up and moved very, very slowly in and out a couple of times because you have air in the system, and building up too much pressure with the air can damage the seals. And it's up and running again.